Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.
And we're back, and we are moving into our first conversation for this morning, as we mentioned earlier in the show. Today, we're taking a deeper look at the economic recovery strategy that has been presented for Belize. And joining us via Zoom is Kay Menzies, the past president of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry and a business owner. Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Marlene. Good morning, Belize. Hope everybody's having a nice, bright Monday morning.
That's right. Well, the rain has held up, if just for a bit, so that's a good start.
Absolutely.
So, Kay, let's dive into the conversation. The plan was presented on Friday, and I understand that there were several stakeholders that were involved in developing this plan. Do you want to talk from the business perspective as to how involved you guys were?
Well, I wasn't the person sitting on the committee, so I can't speak to that level of involvement. I know that the chamber did have a representative sitting on the Economic Stabilization Committee, I think it's called. I'm not absolutely sure. But what I gather as I see the plan is that the ideas that have been submitted over time by the chamber, not just during the COVID era, but a little bit before that as well, have been incorporated to some extent in the plan, as well as those of other organizations. So it seems to be a compilation of submissions as well as whatever the committee may have deliberated on, no?
Now, this was something that I know had been called for from very early on. You know, everybody was speaking about, we want to see a plan, as we quickly started to realize the effects of the pandemic and the subsequent lockdown was going to have devastating effects on our economy.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the plan as it's been presented?
What I'm curious about, and what nobody's really spoken to, the press conference was basically a presentation of the plan. But what I'm really curious about is the timeline surrounding this plan. If you look, there's quite a list of things that we agree must be done. We as business people have been asking for many of these items for years. For example, the Labor Act has been somewhat updated, but is quite outdated in many respects. Assistance to private sector in securing market access. We're always talking about PSAs with Mexico, Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are needed items, absolutely. But what's the timeline? Is this something that will be done this year, early next year? Who's in charge? In theory, if we look at it, market access would be the Ministry of Investment and Trade, handling foreign trade issues. But this is an assumption. Is there a committee that's behind this, driving it to make sure that these boxes are ticked very quickly? Are some things we know are happening already, but what's the status? Where's the chart that says this will be completed by February of 2021? This we expect to be finished by this year. Really, what's the plan? What's the coherent order of activity here to make this plan come fully into play?
Yeah, valid point. I think it would then, I mean, it's being called a strategy that would definitely come with timelines and assigned roles as to who's going to manage these processes. So at this point, it is essentially just a plan, a vision of where we want to go. Now, some have said, I mean, in terms of looking at where the priority areas are, we're talking about agriculture and tourism again. There is some room for diversification, and then some of the other areas are looking at kind of building a supportive structure. Let's start with that. I think the efficiency is something that the business sector particularly has always talked about, in being able to improve our own competitiveness in being able to reach other markets.
Correct. The whole idea is that if we pull together, and the public sector, for example, if we're talking market access, there's so much more than just negotiating a PSA. We have to be ready. We have to be certified for that market. We have to ensure that we have product that can go into that market. what product can go in and be competitive, what's needed to make that product ultimately as competitive as it can be. Is the product price-wise as competitive as it can be? Have we adjusted taxation so that that product will be able to go out there and earn us foreign exchange? There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make sure not just that we have access to, say, the Taiwanese market or some part of the Mexican market, but also to make sure that having gained access, our products can sell. So, when we're mentioning that, we have to talk about taxation, we have to talk about incentives, we have to talk about availability of raw materials. We have to talk about who can make those raw materials available. Yeah. So if we don't pull all of that together, then yes, we have an agreement, but then what?
Yeah. And beyond, I think beyond in knowing who and when, there's also a how question. Because some of the recommendations that are being put forward will come with resources, whether financial or just increased human resources. You talked about clearing backlogs at the lands department. That alone will take an additional team. In terms of the practicality of it, do you think that it's just making commitments, manifesto-like commitments as we move forward?
And there have been those questions since the plan was launched. Is this somebody saying we'll do this? And again, that's where it's important to come back and say for confidence purposes, because business confidence is a lot of this. There has to be a confidence action that says, because you don't want business people coming back and saying, guys, you've been telling us for years you're going to do this. So you're telling us again you're going to do it. But, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. It's got to be, I think at some point we have to be getting the authorities 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, whatever it is, whatever it takes, to get out here and say, okay, my job is to make sure that this activity happens. Mm-hmm. My job is, I've been assigned the job of broadening the incentives and making sure they're more available. Mm-hmm. And my target market is, I'm first going after this one, and we should, by the end of 3 months, have all these markets settled out. It's the whole notion that everybody, it's all hands on deck right now, and everybody, this guy's lifting the sails, this guy's pulling the rope, that guy's steering out to sea, and so on and so forth. We've got to know that there is a coordinated, active effort to make this happen and happen quickly.
Yeah. I guess what I hear from you is the fact that we are not very clear on what are the short-term immediate actions that they're aiming to be able to deliver from the plan that we've received so far, and the lack of clarity in terms of what's going to be more medium and long term is also a part of the concern.
Yeah, it's looking at the document, it's tough to lay out. From our point of view, everything is urgent. Yeah. I mean, in a business position, when you're all of a sudden 40% of your economy in the form of tourism has magically disappeared overnight, and you're having to find ways to fill that gap, everything is urgent. So it's not easy to be the government and say, okay, this is going to take priority over this, but and so on. But at the same time, there has to be a laying out that says this is the blueprint to make all these action items happen. These are action items. This is a really nice to-do list that the business community, I think from our point of view, would say, hey, everything on there, absolutely right, got to be done. Yeah. But the question then is, okay, who's doing it? When are they doing it? What's first? What's second? What's third? What can I invest in to make it happen faster? What are you going to do to help me make sure that my investment means something? Yeah. Because again, there is a component of this that kicked in on Saturday, the MSME Assistance Program, which is a lending program. But you want to make sure that if you're borrowing that money, that you can put that money to best use. Mm-hmm. And if your products are, let's say, back to the example of exporting, if my products are not competitive because I haven't been able to access an incentive, and it'll take me 6 to 8 months to access that incentive, and I'm borrowing money because I want to export, I'm going to be stuck. Yeah. So a lot of this has to move a lot faster. And it would be nice as business people, we have to plan. We would like to know from our own action plans that hey, by a month from now, I can count on this happening. So let me go ahead and line up the financing at the bank or whichever financial institution is providing assistance at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you when you say everything is urgent. That's just the current context of where we are. But
Yeah.
is it perhaps maybe a situation where looking at legal frameworks, which can be quicker in terms of getting results, tax reform, or even allowing for some of the, I guess, the paperwork that can change or can be implemented faster? Is that one of the measures that maybe you could look forward to?
It's a lot, yes. There's a lot that's needed in order to make this come together. And you're absolutely right. Some of this is legal reform. Some of this will require maybe trips to the House. Some of it not so much. Some of it will be a matter of passing an SI or something a little bit less onerous than going to the House of Representatives. But where legal changes need to be made, that takes a little while. You have to draft it. You have to make sure it doesn't conflict with other legislation, so on and so forth. But it doesn't make it any less urgent for it to happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was talking comparatively versus being able to establish some of the links that they've spoken about. When we talk about where we are at this moment, there seems to be, again, just this primary focus on looking at tourism, and with the amount of investment people have made in tourism, it clearly is important that you have to put some resources there. But we know that it's not going to be an immediate recovery. The agriculture sector is also getting some, or being considered another priority area as well. But would you agree that perhaps it's time to be able to look at other alternatives, ways in how we can perhaps earn money from another sector, especially, you know, we're in the middle of a hurricane season. We know the fickleness of the agriculture industry, especially during that time. Tourism is what it is at the moment. And so maybe just as a part of a recovery, or as the Prime Minister calls a rebirth, we should be looking at something new, or at least improving on something that currently exists.
Yes, we should. And as the private sector, that's really what we should be doing every day. Let's look at the context of COVID. COVID isn't going anywhere right now. We hear news lately of vaccines being developed, but those vaccines have to also be developed, made, disseminated. You have populations that are in much more trouble than Belize. And so that's going to take a while. Even if a vaccine is developed tomorrow, there's no guarantee that Belize will have access to it the next day. So COVID is here for a while. What does that mean? That means a lifestyle change. It means that on some level, I may turn around and say, okay, I can work from home. I can do this, I can do that. What are the strengths that are developed under COVID for Belize? But Belize may have to do tourism differently. I think what needs to be generally understood, and I'm not sure it's yet fully understood, is that we do not go back to what life was in February. That's not happening. So if you're thinking that a cruise ship is going to come ashore with 3,000 people in a couple of months and that life will return to normal, no, even the cruise ships are trying to figure out what they can do to survive. So here it is. The lucky thing for us is we're an incredibly spacious country. You don't have to be lined up like sardines to go places. You have some countries where the crowds have to be thinned out. We're a little bit different than that because we have so much space. This means that the tourism industry is probably looking at things in that regard, in that context, and saying, good, we limit the number of people going to Mayan ruins on any given day. That also makes it a little bit more private. If we're a resort, obviously we've been hearing about the gold standard of sanitation and so on. These are things that resorts and hotels worldwide are being redesigned completely to allow for social distancing without tourism going away completely. On the other level, agriculture, we're talking food. But we have to move, and we've been saying this for years and years and years and years, but it's here now. We have to move on from commoditization. It's not just selling your corn, it's what can you do with your corn to add value. It's not just selling your beans, it's how can you make your beans sell for a little bit more. We did it in one industry extremely well. We converted raw pepper into a really nice sauce that goes worldwide and makes us look good out there.
Yeah.
And we have to do much, much more of that.
Yeah.
Then there's a third component to our economy. Well, there's many components, but for this discussion, I'll talk about services.
Yeah.
If we are talking, tourism is the largest part of our service economy.
Yeah.
But we are talking about BPOs, we're talking about the international financial services, that we can still provide services to other countries, and we don't have to be crammed up into rooms like sardines either. Mm-hmm. We have learned over the COVID lockdown to work from home in those industries, and there's a need as businesses in North America cut costs. They're coming more and more out to countries like ours, mm-hmm. and these are opportunities. And then the world is going digital. We have opportunities there as well. We have a relatively low cost, brand new industry, lots of young developers going out there developing websites and software and apps and so on. And that provides an opportunity because we're relatively cheaper than North America. So it's a matter of us analyzing what the opportunities are as the private sector and bringing the public sector along and saying, listen, in order for me to fully exploit this opportunity, I need you to come along for the ride and make sure that I have access here, that the laws permit me to do this, and that I am able to move rapidly. Mm-hmm. In all of this, in the COVID era, the biggest thing is to be able to make a decision and act on it quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned quite a lot there. Let's go with your last point, because that's also a key pillar in what we've seen presented in the economic recovery plan, which is looking at the efficiency. There is one portion of the plan, and the document, I should say, that's been presented that includes some dollar figures for the next 12 months as to where investments are going to go. Of course, once again, we see a heavy focus on infrastructure, and then we also have water and sanitation and agriculture. But you see the refocusing on e-governance and the improving of efficiency there. Just when you look at that particular section where there's a monetary value assigned, do you think that it is moving in the right direction in an urgent, or should I say, to immediately address where the biggest concerns are?
What it does is it signals an understanding for e-government that we do need that aspect of activity to speed up. In terms of how it's applied on the ground, again, part of that is the legal changes that are required, the personnel approach, mm-hmm. for example, change management. We don't love going from one, let's say, paper forms to electronic. But imagine being able to apply for a piece of land and within 24 hours know if you qualify for that piece of land, if it's confirmed that it's available, you're able to pay your money and you're able to get your title transfer immediately for collateral, for loan purposes, and so on. Mm-hmm. Imagine how much faster we could move if that was happening. Imagine being able to apply for your passport and know that you don't have to wait any length of time to make sure that it goes through for your passport renewal. Imagine all these things. Imagine all the government processes going on site. You don't have to stand in line, social distancing. You don't have to stand in line, and you don't have to waste half a day that you could be using being productive in other ways as well, because you did that. Let's say you did that at 3 a.m. when you had you were up and watching a movie and decided, let me get this over with. The idea of e-government has been around for a while, and it's nice to see that there's some funding being devoted to it. There also, we want to make sure that, again, there is some kind of timeline pressure that says, we believe we can do this within 6 months, this within 3 months, and this within a year, so that we're able to work, not only plan, but know that somebody out there feels the pressure of a deadline and makes it happen quickly.
Yeah. Do you think there's one area in particular when it comes to e-governance that should be addressed as quickly as possible?
I would say, I think out there a lot of people are hoping that there's a movement on lands. And the reason for that is there is a lot of, most investments begin by acquiring land or transfer of land. So if we can begin there and clear that up, that would be, I think, a significant step forward and excellent signal of confidence to the community, business community.
Okay. And then looking at the opportunity for growth, I can't imagine what it's like, let me just start that way, to be a business owner under this climate. I think, we hear several things in people wanting to hold on to their employees, and they're doing the best that they can. Some are doing the best that they can. And then, of course, you can only do based on what you see as the potential for the continuation of your business, beyond getting to growth. What in this plan for you helps to alleviate that big stressor? The possibility of being able to make plans as to where you'll be just at the end of the year, and how many of your employees, because that seems to be a big driver here too. We hear it mentioned quite a bit about employers holding on to their employees.
An economy functions when money moves. If I am spending my $100 at your establishment, and then you use that $100 to pay your employees, and they then shop at another establishment, and then that establishment uses that money to buy raw materials, and then the raw materials supplier is able to invest in whatever he needs to make that raw material. That's money has to move around the economy.
Yes.
The idea here is, from the plan that was presented, clearly to inject more money into the economy. And what we hope for, and again, that's why the timelines also make sense as well, is that money moves in quickly, that it's circulated and circulated within the economy, to allow business people to see that cash is beginning to flow. One of the examples of that, that we've seen out there, is local tourism.
Yeah.
Some resorts would have had to be completely closed now, employees out of a job, people completely unable to feed their children. If it hadn't been that the resorts instead hit on the idea, let me mark down my prices a little bit, let's get our Belizeans moving around the country. And people started on the weekends to go around the country, getting to know their country better, spending time at these resorts and so on, which enabled, by them paying their room bills, to allow employees to be able to make some money, go home, feed their families, etc., and buy food to feed their families, and so on and so forth. So money was able to continue circulating.
Yeah.
If this plan is done the right way, one, it needs to be seen as a completely, almost complete investment in the private sector being able to ramp up and continue to function, given whatever challenges we face ahead. And we've seen some fairly bad news over the last couple of days, so we know challenges are ahead. And what we need to do is make sure that also the ease of doing business is increased. So the other part of that is not just getting the money circulating, but the assurance and the reassurance that what we're doing, what's being done in this list, in this to-do list, is going to allow us in the private sector to do what we do more easily and more quickly. I don't have to spend 5 days waiting for an approval. I don't have to wait 6 months to see if I'll get clear. I know that if I apply today, I'll be cleared tomorrow. I can invest, I can hire, I can move on, I can pay my staff.
Yeah.
So this has got to be, it has, in being presented, if it's not seen as an action plan truly with urgent action behind it, and it's not seen as injecting money into the economy, then it will still have quiet times ahead.
Yeah, and looking at the labor law structure, I know that was also a big concern coming out from the private sector, to be able to ensure that whatever needs to be done, or how you manage your employees are clearly cut out. We never knew, never expected to live through a pandemic, and the laws clearly don't reflect it either. So what about indicators there and being able to make those necessary changes?
Well, there is a quick mention of labor law in the plan. And to be honest with you, I mean, one of the most obvious examples, which we all discussed a little bit earlier in the lockdown, was we haven't covered any laws for work from home. We haven't covered any laws for flexible employment. We haven't covered any laws for when again, you mentioned earlier, some employers have been fighting to keep their folks employed as opposed to complete layoffs.
Yeah.
Currently, our labor laws are drafted that you only have the choice of having layoffs as opposed to, say, extending salary cuts to kind of minimize the pain across the board.
Yeah.
Example there, many employers had to decide. One put it very clearly to me. He said, listen, I have X amount of employees, and I sat with them and I talked with them and I said, either we all take a cut or two people are going to have to lose their jobs. And his team decided that they didn't want any of their colleagues losing their jobs, so they agreed to the cuts. We as employers have to be clear in how we communicate with our employees. But a lot of the time you wanna spread minimum sacrifice across the board as opposed to inflicting maximum sacrifice on a few people.
Yeah.
And the labor law doesn't speak to that at the moment. So that has to be fixed very quickly.
That should be an urgent.
It should be.
Yeah.
And then you have, as we shift around, and this is critical to what's coming next, as we shift around and we introduce new methods of doing business. Let's say we get big into the digital economy.
Yeah.
Consider that the government has said, listen, we want to really move on e-government now. That will create a certain amount of opportunity for young developers and people with digital capabilities. So, but they operate differently. They may operate by contractual employment where they hire somebody to do just a specific function. They may hire somebody that's basically, I only need you part-time 4 hours a day. And our employment laws are not very flexible when it comes to hours worked and so on. So we're going to have to look at labor law catching up with the demand of new kinds of employment. Let's say that you need to bring down your website for updates at 3 a.m. Does the labor law cover certain people working certain times of day?
Yeah.
For example, we always joke about it, Marlene. You and I can't work at night. And I don't know that piece of the labor law has ever been updated, but women can't work past certain hours. So, it's really as outdated as the labor law is. It hasn't spoken to a pandemic. Maybe it's not old enough to go back to the Spanish influenza in that case, but certainly we're no longer a mercantile country where we're dealing strictly with shops. We have moved on from that, and the labor law has to catch up with the manufacturing side, and it has to catch up with the services side.
But your point in looking at how people are working now is a critical one, because it's not just a new norm, it's a new era of type of work. If we pay attention to what happens internationally, some companies made the decision way into next year that they're going to do work from home. And depending on what happens during the rest of this year, we don't know if we'll go back to that. So it'd be really important on both sides for protection for the employee and employer that there's some kind of clarity written in. And so, as we noted, there is a slight mention of the labor laws in the economic recovery plan, but surely there should be more clarity there, or at least a bit more definition as to what will be amended.
There's that, and to be honest with you, yes, we need that, and we also need to look at covering where we have a skills gap.
Yeah.
There have been several skills gaps studies done, I think 2 by the chamber and 1 possibly by at least one other entity. So you have several skills gap studies out there showing that if we look at all the professions across the board, this is where we have shortages or inability to fill locally. Again, if we're looking at demand coming up and if we're looking at trying to create a really flexible economy, on some level we're going to have to look at either attracting our fellow Belizeans who are abroad with those skills, or attracting people who are interested to come in bringing those skills to Belize, and at the same time training our fellow Belizeans with those skills. Yeah. And again, I speak to the digital economy on one level, but also in terms of food chemists, food scientists, R&D capabilities, and so on. We may not have exactly what we need there. And so if we're talking labor, we have to talk about a certain component of immigration that says in order for businesses to be able to get ahead, they also have to be more easily able to reach out and fill those skills gaps. Not hire new people for positions where you have 20 people competing already or 200 people, but certainly where the space exists and is holding back development, then we work to fill those spaces very quickly. And that has to be a component of labor, which then involves immigration as well.
Yeah. And I mean, just in terms of moving the conversation forward, when we talk about injection of capital, of having money moving in around the country again, a lot of people are banking on the reopening of the airport on August 15th. And from what I've seen in the plan so far, there isn't any other indication of a plan or a strategy as to how we're going to get new money into the country. Are we still putting too many eggs in this basket?
Well, it's difficult to say. I think every single country in the world is having the same issue of what to do, and we're all walking around like that game when you were a kid that you put the blindfold over and tried to find your way around the room and catch your friends. We're trying to figure it out, and so it's difficult to say you're looking in the wrong place or whatever. But certainly there are many right places, and we have to look at them all. So one of the things that the plan does mention is a revamping of the QRP program. There are people who don't just want to visit Belize for 2 weeks. They want to come and they want to live in a country that's, from their perspective, cheaper to live in, and they want to have a good life, which means that they have to invest in some construction. They will come in, they will buy groceries, they will demand a particular kind of grocery. They will buy boats, they will have a car, they will need to buy fuel, they will need to basically all the trappings of living well. And the QRP right now does need some revamping. I think everybody agrees with that. So again, looking at that plan, if we move to revamp the QRP very quickly, we may get people coming in that say, I want to be a professional working from my country. Barbados went and created the welcome stamp and really grabbed attention with that. But we have the capability to do the same. We have had professionals say, listen, I'd like to work from Belize because whatever reason you have lots of activity that allows for, the kind of me living there and being able to do my work. We have broadband capabilities. We have, all the infrastructure that's needed for somebody to come in and have 12 years, that'd be good. But a period of time, 12 months, whatever, that they can live here, feel safe, and invest in our country. Because if they come in and they spend foreign exchange, guess what we need? We need foreign exchange. So then it works out. That's one opportunity. Looking at tourism differently, that's one way that we can go. And we've seen Barbados, just as I said, grab all the attention in working in that regard. In terms of the other aspects of moving forward, getting those market access agreements in place, getting our agro-producers moving forward on value adding. They want to, but in many respects, you have small businesses who are very innovative, very capable, wanting to do things a little differently, and just need either the investment or for the red tape to disappear. And that action plan should be speaking to that red tape disappearing as well as the investment.
And what about a recommendation made by the Chamber much earlier about looking at priority access or restricting imports in goods that are produced in Belize, at least for now?
And this is something we keep hearing about, the priority imports and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And we have never been able to source a formal list of what's allowed and not allowed. So, we have really good water here. We have world-class water. Should we be importing water, as an example? And that's an example that was given by a central bank official way back when this was all beginning. But the whole idea is that you want to be able to strategically restrict imports. Yes, we're low on foreign exchange. Yes, we need to be very careful how we spend it. But at the same time, we have to be careful that we don't restrict our manufacturers' capabilities to produce. For example, the last couple of weeks with the port disruptions, we've had several manufacturers reach out to the chamber and say, listen, I've got packaging on board a ship, I've got inputs on board a ship, I'm stuck here because I'm unable to prepare my shipment to go out because I don't have the products that I need to meet my certification for my export market abroad. We have to be careful that when we talk about what we import and how we move freight and traffic, that we don't do it in a way that we disrupt those who are trying to earn foreign exchange for us, those who are creating jobs.
All right. Final words, Kay?
Good to see the list coming out of the government. It was, I think we all listened keenly to the press conference last week to find out what's coming next and the energy that the public sector will put behind the private sector's particular energy as well. And the one thing that I would ask on a personal level is, let's see that we put some urgency behind it that says, not that we're not saying that it's seen as urgent, but certainly that we can establish some timelines, we can establish some responsibilities, that we say, okay, when this thing seems to be moving slow, we know who to ask how it's progressing, and that we can make sure that where the private sector can plug into the plan working, let's make sure it works. This is an issue where we all have to get together to get ahead. And if the action plan, as I said, the action plan definitely has components in it that the business community, the tourism industry, and so on have been asking for a really long time. So it's good to see that this is a list of, hey, we're going to move forward on these things. But one more thing, let's make sure that we show how fast we're moving forward on these things so that everybody knows that they can plan around it.
Nice. All right. Thank you so much for helping us go through the plan as it has been presented so far and reminding us of some of the urgent needs, at least from the private sector's perspective. Thank you once again, Kay.
Marlene, thank you for having me.
All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're going to be focusing on birth registration. There is an effort by UNHCR and UNICEF to be able to make the process easier for new parents, so that no child is left in a situation where they don't get registered after birth. That's coming up after the break, so please stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.